Hey guys, welcome back to the Fertility Confidence Podcast. A super exciting interview for you today. I had the immense pleasure to sit down with Amy Beckley, who's the founder and creator of Proov. And if you've been in the fertility game for any length of time, Proov has probably come up on your social media or in a group or recommended to you. It is a company that I get asked about quite often in my DMs. Do I recommend Proov? Do I use Proov? And I was so excited to just sit down and pick Amy's brain a little bit about her journey. She shares very vulnerably her fertility story and how her experience through her fertility journey brought her to creating this amazing company that is offering such a game-changing experience in terms of diagnostic testing accessibility, especially. So something that I get, asked for recommendations on is at-home testing, either because, the cost of blood work is too high, or because doctors aren't willing to order blood work yet, and someone is trying to be proactive or feels in their gut that something is off. And Proov is really bridging that gap for clients, which I think is so amazing. So Amy shares her story, how she came to the concept of Proov. She literally created this amazing company in her basement, which I am so fascinated by. And I even mentioned to her, I kind of want to have you back just to talk business, which is not what this podcast platform is for. But as an entrepreneur myself, I felt like I had just a lot of questions flooding through my brain. Amy definitely shows how incredibly confident she is in her product through the way that she spoke in our session together. And I am very, very excited to try their new full kind of cycle mapping offer that they're providing. So I hope you enjoy a little bit of information about some at-home testing options and the difference between PDG and progesterone and how you can actually use that to support yourself in your fertility journey, either as ways to gather treatment options or to help you advocate for yourself with your current care team. As always, if you guys have any questions, come find me over on Instagram at Fertility Confidence Method. Everything you need to know is in the show notes here. You can find more about Proov on their Instagram at Proov Tests. You can also find more on their website. They also sell via Amazon. So everything that you need is down below for you, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, Amy, welcome to the podcast.
It's so exciting to be here. Thanks for having me.
I was telling Amy before I clicked play how I was maybe having a little bit of a fangirl business moment prepping for this episode. Because I've used Proov personally. I recommend Proov to my clients. I mean, I've loved watching the evolution of the company. So why don't you share a little bit about you, Amy, and how you came to the concept of Proov?
Yeah, absolutely. So Proov is kind of the marriage between my personal experience with infertility and my background being a scientist. I was basically like all women. I put all my ducks in a row. I went to school, I started my career. I, had enough money to buy a nice house in a nice neighborhood. We got married. I had a dog, and I was like, all right, this is going to be easy to build a family. And it wasn't. It wasn't. And so I did all the things that I could do. I tracked temperature, I tracked LH tests, cervical mucus, all that stuff, and these beautiful charts. And it took me about 8 months to get pregnant. And I remember getting pregnant on my birthday and thinking, oh my God, this is amazing. We finally got pregnant. It was all awesome. So my birthday is in the end of April. Very shortly after, on Mother's Day, I was out celebrating with my husband, our first, quote unquote Mother's Day, only to get up from lunch and feel this gush. And it was the start of a miscarriage. And I was like, this isn't fair. Like, what's going on? And then I kind of thought this was the silver lining, because if I had a loss, surely somebody could help me, because what I was seeing in my charting was that I would have an LH surge, I would have a temperature shift, but my luteal phase, the time between ovulation and next cycle, was very short. It was 7, sometimes 9 days. I had a lot of spotting at the end of my cycle. And knowing from my background as being a scientist, it was, hey, you need enough progesterone to support pregnancy, and it takes 7 to 10 days for that fertilized embryo to go all the way down the fallopian tube and implant in the uterus. And maybe I was having trouble because I had some kind of issue and I wasn't allowing for implantation. And so I went to my physician and I said, I had a loss. I've been trying 8 months. Can you help me? And they basically turned me away. They said, you haven't been trying long enough. You hadn't had enough losses. And they said, congratulations on actually getting pregnant, and better luck next time. And this is normal. And these are all not things you say to a woman who is in the middle of a miscarriage, by the way. And so I felt very frustrated. And so kind of rewinding on the story, I had a few more losses. I tried a few more months. I finally went to an RE. They did all the blood work, everything. They said, everything's normal, everything's fine. And I said, but what about my charting? Something wrong? And they're like, no, you're fine. Like, if you ovulate, obviously you're going to you have enough progesterone to get pregnant. And I was always like, okay. But was given the diagnosis of unexplained infertility, and told that IVF was my best chance. And so we did 2 cycles. I have a 12-year-old son, as a result of that second IVF cycle. A couple of years later, when he was about 2, I turned to my husband and I said, yes, I know I am crazy, but I would like another one. And, having, 6 losses and having all this infertility and this IVF journey, he basically goes, okay. And I said, but this time we're not going to do IVF. I'm going to figure out what's wrong. And so I had a really wonderful RE at the time, and I sat there and I had conversations. So my background is, I'm a scientist. I've studied hormone signaling. I've done breast cancer signaling, stress signaling, and then I got really passionate about reproductive hormone signaling. And so we had all these conversations about the egg and like the progesterone and the ovarian health versus the egg health itself. And basically, I came with this theory that you can have a really good egg, but your ovarian function can't support a pregnancy. So it's 2 separate things. So what I guess they teach in med school is that you have an egg and it's either a healthy one or not. And that's what controls pregnancy. And if it's a good egg, you'll get pregnant. If it's a bad egg, you won't. And here I am saying, well, there's nothing to do it, because the egg releases from the ovary, and then the ovary is what makes the hormones. And so if you don't support ovarian function, and you're not making good estrogen levels to really build that lining, and you're not making good progesterone levels to make it sticky and receptive to that embryo, then you're just going to have a harder time to get pregnant and to keep that pregnancy. And so he said, yeah, that makes sense. He's like, but there's no diagnostic test to tell us any of that stuff. And so that's when the idea stuck in my mind. And then I said, okay, well, you know what? I'm not going to do IVF. I think I have low progesterone. I think I have an ovulatory issue that's producing low progesterone. Could we just do progesterone? So part of the IVF procedure is, once you implant, once you do the egg retrieval, take the eggs out, you have to inject yourself with these god awful needles of progesterone, because they know progesterone helps support the luteal phase and a pregnancy. I was like, let's skip all that and just give me the progesterone. He's like, yeah, sure. There's not very many studies on it, but yeah, happy to do that. So we did that. And within a couple cycles, I got pregnant naturally, and I have a healthy 9-year-old. And, coming off of that, I was like, wow, if we just had better diagnostic tools to help people understand that ovulation is not yes or no. It's not, yes, I released an egg, everything's fine, or no, I did not, everything's not fine. It's a, there's good ovulation, bad ovulation. I like to say pregnancy friendly ovulation, and then maybe an ovulatory problem or dysfunction, or anovulatory, so you're not ovulating. And so, after my experience, I kind of came out of the closet, because I was dealing with this if I was not talking to anybody. And I said, hey, I have this issue. And these women, these friends, family members would like, private message me and say, I'm dealing with the same thing. What did you do? And I would just, one-on-one help them and they'd all get pregnant. And I was like, I think there's something here. I think I can help a lot of people understand their bodies and help them be successful. So we started Proov in 2016, and it was just, my way to give back to women to help them advocate for themselves and get the treatment that they wanted. I didn't think that women should have to wait 12 months to get help. I really absolutely do not think women need 3 miscarriages before they can get help. I mean, one is hard enough. Let's try to prevent even one because they're not fun. And I believe that IVF shouldn't be our only option. There's a lot of women that can't afford it, don't want to do it for religious reasons, can't get off work, can't travel to a clinic, all these different things. And so if we could create this kind of middle ground where we could understand if women have these ovulation issues that maybe could feed them into simpler treatments. It's the most common cause of infertility, and it also becomes the most underdiagnosed because we don't have the right tools to assess that. Um, and so that was the thing. I went into my basement and I developed my first prototypes, and I did this really god awful PowerPoint presentation that I turned into a JPEG, and I posted it on Indiegogo. And I'm like, I'm like, here it is. Would you buy it? And if you buy it, I'll make it. And I had this idea of an at-home progesterone test where we could not have to go to labs, not have to request blood draws, not have to get physicians buy-in about our own bodies and our own health to give us the information that we needed. And so we launched that and we got fully funded in 48 hours, and we just made it and people bought it, and then we made more and then they bought it, and we just grew from there. And so just kind of filling that need of putting that power back into a woman's hand because our healthcare system is broken. Um, typical healthcare is, all right, you try on your own, you're given absolutely no help at all. Nobody teaches you that in high school, college, anything. There's like nothing. So you just like, out to the wolves. And then if you have issues, you come and your OB refers you to an RE who's trained in IVF. And it's like, well, if we could at least support people, and I know you're in the same business, like support people along the way, because we've seen things like diet changes, mindfulness, exercise, supplements, like have a huge impact. I mean, everything that goes in your body affects your hormones, and your menstrual cycle is your 5th vital sign. And so if your body is not healthy, it's trying to sustain life, it steals those resources from your menstrual cycle and says, you know what, now is not a good time to have a baby. We have to get our house in order, so to speak. And so the menstrual cycle is the first sign that there are issues. And so anything you can do to support a healthier mind and body to kind of put you back in balance, you'll see those effects in your menstrual cycle. And that could literally be the key. And then when you don't support women and you let them, we call it the pit of despair, because they start off here going, oh, everything is amazing. Like I'm going to have sex with my husband, my partner, and we're going to have this baby. It's going to be awesome. And then they get a negative pregnancy test, and then another one, and then another one. And it just goes down and down and down. And then their stress levels go up and they're constantly worried. And then it's even harder to ovulate. Right. And it's this vicious circle. Exactly. It's a vicious circle. And I'm like, can we please support women on day one, please? And so that was my whole mission, was let's give women resources. So we are FDA cleared for at-home use. We give this straight to women. They do not require prescriptions, anything like that, so that they can kind of get that information that they need.
I love that. And I get asked all the time, like, are there tests that I can just do at home? My doctor won't order anything. How do I get this information that you're always talking about? And it's still, a huge issue in the fertility community. And I love that you saw that gap with your own care, and your story um, is one I hear a lot. The same similar iteration of the same situation of you haven't tried long enough, you haven't had enough losses, keep trying, it's working, your body will figure it out. And the reality is that that's not always the case. And if you have one miscarriage, you're at a higher risk of further. And the likelihood of those miscarriages being caused by the same issue is quite high. So, like you said, why wouldn't we do some investigation and some work earlier on and not have to continue to go through the struggle and pain for longer? So thank you so much for sharing your story. And I love that you turned what I can only imagine was a very difficult experience for you and your family into something that is helping so many women.
Yeah, it was I get that question a lot. It's like, how did you go through 7 miscarriages and keep going? I refuse to fail. I refuse to let that be my fate. And then Proov is their reason for being here. So it's like, yes, I wish that they were here and
Mm.
not with me. But the fact that they had a purpose, and their purpose was to bring this education and to get me to start something like this, is really important, for me, and it makes what we're doing very worth it. I mean, hearing stories that women come to us after they've had a loss and their physicians just totally discount them and say it's normal and it's not, and they know it's not normal. They think it's something that they did, that they ate, that they, ran a marathon the next day, and obviously that's whatever the reason is. Like, we always blame ourselves, and so if we can be more proactive and allow her to get testing and to think of things, because some losses are preventable. If you have an infection, if you have a low hormone issue, those are things that can be fixed. There's no reason why you have to have 2 or 3 or 4 in a row. I mean, so, just being a little more proactive about it. We always tease that if miscarriage was a male problem, it would have been solved a long time ago.
Probably accurate. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
not that funny. For those who might not know what Proov is, walk us through what Proov is offering the fertility community.
So Proov is a suite of at-home diagnostics that screen for the major issues causing subfertility or infertility. So we allow women at home to understand, everything from, are they ovulating successfully? And do they have enough eggs, like their egg count? Are they timing intercourse correctly? And then we also have, a partnership with a male company that does semen analysis. So what we really want to do is bridge that gap between trying naturally and to more invasive treatments to kind of identify issues and then correct them. So we offer both testing as well as support. So we have different supplements to support, hormone balance. And then we also have direct connections to physicians who can prescribe medications depending on who that woman is, and lots of blog resources about what to eat, what not to eat, and how not to microwave in plastic and all these like crazy things. But our flagship product, is a PDG test, which stands for pregnanediol gluconide. um,
I cannot say that. So when I always say PDG and people will ask me, well, what is that? I'm like, it's a progesterone metabolite.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
It's a longer word, but I can't say it.
Yeah. So progesterone is what is released after ovulation. It is the hormone that controls implantation and pregnancy. If at any time you don't have enough of this hormone, you will either not get pregnant, you will have a miscarriage, you will have preterm labor. So it's important that you have a healthy amount of progesterone. And so progesterone is initially made by the ovary. And then if you get pregnant, that transfers over to the placenta to help you remain pregnant. So that's progesterone. Um, and so progesterone is in the serum and it is not in the urine. And so what we do instead is we look at the metabolite or a marker of progesterone in urine. And we use a simple urine test. So if you use ovulation test or pregnancy test, it looks the same idea, same format. So you collect first morning urine, you dip a strip, and then you read the results after 10 minutes. And in our case, a positive test is 1 line and a negative test is 2 lines. And what we're looking for is elevated, sustained levels across the implantation window. This is what we call successful ovulation. So in our minds, it is not just okay to ovulate. It is ovulation plus sustained progesterone in the luteal phase to have the highest chance at conception. Um, and so we just did a clinical study where we show that women with high PDG after ovulation had a 75% increase in pregnancy rates over those that had low PDG after ovulation, which makes a lot of sense because PDG controls implantation and you can't get pregnant. You can't without enough of this hormone. Um, and so basically, you take 4 tests at the end of your cycle. We also have a really cool app that digitizes everything for you. So it's optional, but it's really cool. Most of our users use it. You take the test like normal, and then instead of reading it by eye, you take a picture of the test, and then it can read the lines on the test, and it can read your hormone level because we put hormone concentration calibration curves in there. And then it can tell you when to test. It can tell you what the results mean. And then at the end of the cycle, we give you this ovulation report card. So again, ovulation is not yes or no, but it's a living, breathing thing, right? And so we score your ovulation, give you an ovulation score, 0 to 100. 100 is defined as sustained elevated PDG levels during your cycle. And that is the most healthy ovulation you can have. That is your highest chance of conception. That also helps make sure you're not having PMS, all these crazy cycle issues. Women just are very prone to low progesterone, especially as we get older, as we, have more stressful lifestyles, if we're, eating more toxic chemicals in the foods and, all the plastics in the water and around. We give you this score. And so you can use that score to help monitor the health of your ovulation. And so if it's a low score, then we will give you tips on, things to eat, lifestyle things to consider, different supplement suggestions, talk to a doctor, get on different medications, because we want to help women support that optimal cycle health, not just for getting pregnant, but just overall functioning as a woman.
Yeah, that balance between estrogen and progesterone in your luteal phase is important, regardless if you're trying to get pregnant or not. So I can see how having this information would be valuable even for women outside of the fertility community who are dealing with PMS or recurrent spotting, unexplained spotting, and things like that as well, without having to get recurrent blood draws and things like that. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Also perimenopause, women that is this menopause? I don't know. My hormones are crazy.
Yeah, yeah, that would actually, I could, my wheels are turning. I have a new patient that I'm like, that actually might not be a bad idea. Um, Something came in my brain when you were talking. Oh, how many days does Proov recommend testing for to get that like what's like the sustained progesterone or PDG? So how many days do you guys recommend testing for?
It's 4 days. So what we do is we log an LH surge. So the first time an LH test is positive, or you can manually input that if you're using cervical mucus or temperature tracking or whatever. You can put in that peak day, and then we test 7, 8, 9, and 10 days after peak fertility. And we want to see that level above 5 micrograms per mil of PDG, which is about equivalent to 10 nanograms per mil of blood. You can't do a direct comparison of blood and serum because of the serum levels fluctuating so much. But yeah, it's those 4 days, and we give you the score. We just actually launched a new product. I'll show you. It's called Complete. This one maps out the entire cycle, and it requires, it depends on the cycle length and the woman, but between 15 and 20 days of testing. But we do everything. Like we look all of her baseline hormones, see if there's anything going on. We give her a ratio of LH to FSH, which can help with kind of early PCOS detection. We look at ovarian reserves. We look at FSH levels at the beginning of the cycle, estrogen levels at the beginning of the cycle, make sure everything's quiet. We'll flag it if it looks like you have diminishing ovarian reserves, so that you can go talk to your physician about freezing eggs, fertility treatments, or whatever you want to do. And then we'll go in and we'll look at the fertile window. And so we measure estrogen to open the window. So that rise in estrogen shows us that that follicle is starting to develop. You're starting to become fertile. And then we close the fertile window with the initial rise in progesterone. And we look at that PDG rise to say, yes, you actually did ovulate. We do see about 10 to 15% of women will have an LH surge. So that positive, like traditional ovulation test, they don't actually ovulate. So we don't use LH to signal, ovulation anymore. We use PDG because it actually shows that your follicle did rupture and you are starting to make progesterone. And then we go back in and we look at the luteal phase health, and we track estrogen and progesterone in the luteal phase and give key ratios. And we do this really cool PDF at the end where they have all this information. But that's more of our advanced kit that really helps understand the whole cycle. It's very popular. Women love it. They love having control of their own data and understanding it and not having to, beg and plead with their provider, please, can I have a blood draw?
Yeah. I love data, and the people that I work with are the same, right? Like, we can make such better clinical decisions when we have not just a full health history and symptomatology, but we also have some numbers to put behind our recommendations, and actually be able to tailor make a plan more specific to your needs with the more information that we have. So I hadn't heard about that test, so we'll have to talk about that a little bit off camera, because I am definitely intrigued. I have a selfish question. I have a selfish, more so interest question for you. How do you find, and you kind of answered this before, but the relationship between PDG and serum progesterone? My understanding a few years ago was that we, like you said, we can't really compare apples to oranges. They're not actually the same thing. And so it's good to see that it's in the urine because we're confirming that ovulation has happened. But it sounds like more research has come out now to show that we can correlate those numbers to actually show that our progesterone is rising adequately. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between the two a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So progesterone is a pulsatile hormone in that it is a negative feedback loop. So when progesterone levels become low, there's a signal to the brain in the form of LH that goes down to the ovary and says, hey, we're low on progesterone, make more. And so you have these pulses where progesterone is high, comes back down low, high, comes back down low. And so when you go in for a blood draw, it's a single point in time measure. And the only diagnostic value you can get from a single blood draw is if it's over 3 or 5, depending on who your doctor is, that is positive for ovulatory activity. And there's also, they said, okay, well, if we're not going to do one blood draw, let's do 3 or 4. And so then they did these studies where if you go into your luteal phase and you go 5, 7, 9 of your luteal phase, so every other day, and get a blood draw and you get 3 or 4, then you can take those numbers, add them together, and then divide by the number, and you get the average. And if that average number was above 10 nanograms per mil, then that was adequate levels to sustain a pregnancy. That's a little more difficult because, again, you're going in for multiple blood draws, but that gets away from this idea of this pulsile. So it's like, okay, well, if we just go, do this random sampling, we can get the average level. And so the cool thing with urine is we use first morning urine. And so we're like a snapshot of your progesterone levels the day before, but the average. And so what you do is you get all these pulsatile, peaks and valleys. It gets metabolized into PDG, and then it sits in your bladder all night and it collects. And so then when you do first morning urine, it's this homogeneous solution of PDG where you can say, okay, this was the average of all that progesterone that I made the day before. And so we can get away from this idea of, a single point in time, yes or no, and then we can look at sustained elevated levels to make sure we have, enough progesterone. Like in my case, I would ovulate. I have enough progesterone. I got the cycle day 21, 7 days after ovulation test. It was always between 5 and 10. It wasn't beautiful numbers, but it's between 5 and 10, which was yes, you're ovulating. But then a couple days later, I would get my period. I'm like, well, I think I'm just dropping too soon. And so, we can also screen for that where we have women that have beautiful levels at the beginning and then they just start to drop too soon. These are the women that have an ovulatory issue that, things like ovulation induction, luteal phase progesterone, diet changes, different things, interventions can really, really help them because they're producing those eggs, they're ovulating, but their ovarian activity is not very healthy and it just needs a little bit of support to get them to that, healthy ovulation level.
So fascinating.
I know.
Amazing.
Progesterone is my favorite hormone. I mean,
And I think the big thing for me is like I work with so many clients and patients with luteal phase defect and exactly what you just described, progesterone that actually gets to a nice high level, but is obviously dropping too quickly and isn't sustaining where it needs to go for implantation. And it is a patient population that is being completely ignored in the conventional fertility world until they're 18 months to 2 years into their journey, and they're often being told that IVF is at that point, based on the length of time that they've been trying, is the best viable statistical option for them, which is not necessarily false, but we've now, missed a huge opportunity by not addressing and treating that in a much cheaper way that would likely work for, even if it's just 50% of them. That's a huge, huge population that could be having a positive impact.
yeah. So they're not just ignored, but they're basically told, no, luteal phase doesn't exist
Mhm.
because and I've been told by this several doctors, they teach them in reproductive endocrinology school. I don't know what it's called. That luteal phase defect does not exist.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
the reason that they teach them that is because there is no diagnostic test that will tell you, do you have a luteal phase defect or not? And so when somebody comes in and says those words, luteal phase defect, they're like programmed in their mind to be like, no, that doesn't exist. It's not a thing. And so we actually don't say those words at all. We say, problem with ovulation, that caused low progesterone after ovulation, because that's kind of a dirty word.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're not just ignored, but they're very dismissed as like, no. And it's bad. Like,
I've had clients tell me that their doctors told them, you know, every time you ovulate, it's 14 days till your period. That
yeah.
doesn't ever change. I'm like, that's not true.
Okay, they need to rewrite the textbooks because every time I see this, I want to like reach into the textbook or the computer and like punch it because it's like the time to ovulation varies, but it's always consistent between ovulation and your next period. It's always 14 days. And I'm like, no, this is also why period tracking apps are always wrong because
Mhm.
they're assuming that that is true, that period to ovulation is 14 days. And so they set this arbitrary fertile window in here. And then women try to have intercourse to get pregnant during this window or try to avoid if they're not trying to get pregnant. And that's not even their fertile window. It's, moved over. Plus they're, to make matters worse, they tell their physicians, this is another thing that you said something about like the best fertility fact or whatever is they will tell physicians that they have a 28-day cycle or they know they're ovulating because their period tracker or they know they're ovulating because of their temperature tracker or whatever. And you know what you're doing? You're shooting yourself in the foot because then they check that box saying, oh, she's ovulating, she's normal, and then you don't get any diagnostic testing. That then tells you're unexplained. If you do have an ovulatory disorder, then you go in through IVF. And so we're really trying hard to say ovulation is not yes or no. You can get a temperature shift, you can get an ovulation, But if it's not that healthy and it can't really sustain that pregnancy, then there are things you can do to improve that don't involve IVF. So that is a really hot tip for anybody listening. Don't let your physician assume that you're properly ovulating because you have a normal cycle, or because your app told you you had a fertile window, or because your temperature increased.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a great piece of advice. And it sounds like we also need to be careful not to use the words luteal phase defect in our doctor's appointments. Unfortunately. Because yeah, the things I have heard is it's something that I always say, I hope in my lifetime this will change in the fertility world. I hope in my lifetime we will see more support for women who've had a miscarriage. We will see more support for women who are under 12 months of trying. We will see more support for couples who need to source out donor sperm or donor eggs, and offering that, free of judgment. I think there's a lot of things that are amazing about the conventional fertility care. And as a naturopathic doctor, I think a lot of people believe my stance would be that it's like natural or bust, and that's not the belief that I hold. I think we need to work in a very synergistic approach and model, and that if we could get there, that's gold standard of care, we would see a hell of a lot more pregnancies a heck of a lot quicker in the world, with a lot less struggle. So I love what you're doing, Amy. I love what you're offering the fertility community. I think Proov is an amazing company. It's been so fun to watch you guys grow, and change. How can people find more information about Proov after listening to this episode?
Our website is proovtest.com. So proovtest.com. Highly recommend you sign up for our email series. We do 2 blogs a week where we just do fertility myths, fertility education, different, random collaborations with different companies. We also have an Instagram channel at Proovtest, Proovtest. And also lots of educational content, kind of resources to move you forward. We are available most countries, I would say. We have an FDA clearance and a CE mark for Europe and the UK. We're on our website. We're also on Amazon. And we have an amazing Facebook community where it's almost 10,000 women, where you go in, you ask questions about Proov or otherwise, you get support. We offer one-on-one support with every kit purchased. Any question, big, small, tech issue, question about fertility, next steps, whatever, our amazing customer support team will answer those, and give you the resources and direct you to the right place. So we are 15 women that really have a passion for women's health and fertility and getting women pregnant. And so we just want to help any way we can. Our biggest pillars are education, and empowerment. So anything we can help women do that, we're here for that.
Amazing. I love that so much. And we'll make sure we link that all in the show notes. And thanks so much, Amy. It was such a great opportunity to get to know you.
Yes, thanks so much.